Shalom, all praises to Yahweh, Ba Hashem, Yahweh Shah, Ba Hashem, Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles, the elders. Salutations to you, sincere brothers, teaching in truth and sincerity. Lesson will be entitled Introducing Jeremiah Hamilton, the Prince of Darkness on Wall Street. Lord will, you are edified. My source, AubreyLewis2.com. Jeremiah Hamilton, the Prince of Darkness, Wall Street's first black millionaire. Who was Jeremiah Hamilton? There is no known image of him, no oil paintings, no sketches, not even a photograph. He almost certainly did have photographs taken of him and most likely commissioned a painting, but if any likeness have survived, it is probably cataloged under miscellaneous or as subject unknown. Jeremiah Hamilton was the only so-called black American broker on Wall Street and was the only so-called black millionaire in mid-19th century, the only black. New York. During his time, Wall Street, so-called black intellectuals belittled his relentless pursuit of wealth as crass and undignified. Modern American historians also ignored Hamilton and his prominence in Wall Street during the 1840s and 50s. Today, he is all but forgotten, yet during his lifetime, Jeremiah was a larger-than-life figure, a man who demanded to be in the forefront and spotlight. He left a huge footprint on the historical record. There are literally tens of thousands of words of newsprint about him and well over 50 court cases involving him as either the plaintiff or defendant in New York City court archives. His business practices were controversial, where most so-called black entrepreneurs sold their goods to other so-called blacks. Hamilton cut a swath through the lily-white New York business world of the mid-1830s, a domain where his depredations and business dealings soon earned him the nickname of the Prince of Darkness. Other so-called whites and so-called blacks too, who had even less affection for him, simply called him Hamilton. Jeremiah's life provides a unique and illuminating insight into so-called black life in New York before and during the Civil War, and provides an example of how a so-called black American and the most racist time in American history still thrived and made a name for himself in spite of the unbelievable obstacles set in front of him. Details of Hamilton's early years are contradictory. Surviving contemporary newspaper articles claim that he was born to free parents in Richmond, Virginia. However, his death certificate stated that he was born in the West Indies and listed Port-au-Prince, Haiti, as the birthplace of his parents. So he was a so-called Haitian. And according to the biblical, the truth or biblical doctrine, his tribe would be Levi, which means, or pronounced as Laya in the Hebrew, which means what? Joined to me. And the me is referring to Yahweh, Ba Hashem, Yahweh Shah. Hamilton was highly literate, fluent in French, extremely capable in working with numbers, and full of ambition. During his lifetime, he would speak of his past in ways that would be an advantage for himself. Thus, there are no definitive records on his early days. When Hamilton finally made his first mark documented in history, it was in the counterfeiting trade. In 1828, when Hamilton was just 21 years old, he ran a large cargo of counterfeit coins from Canada through New York into Haiti for a consortium of prominent New York merchants. The Haitian authorities discovered the scam, and Hamilton was nearly caught. Counterfeiting was illegal in Haiti, and a judge sentenced him in absentia to be executed. Proclamations nailed to the poles all over the island offer a $300 reward for his capture. For 12 days, Hamilton hid around Port-au-Prince harbor, until he could escape on board a vessel bound for New York. By the time of the Great Fire of 1835, which was one of the most destructive events in New York City history, Hamilton was living in New York and renting an office on Wall Street. He made considerable profits from the disaster, taking ruthless advantage of the victims of the fire to pocket some $5 million after the fire. He invested heavily in New York's real estate boom, buying 47 lots of land at Hollett's Cove in present-day Astoria. In addition, he bought docks, wharves, and tracts of land up the Hudson River in Poughkeepsie, New York. He, at this time, was also investing into the Wall Street stock market. Jeremiah Hamilton was more ruthless and aggressive toward his competitors on Wall Street than most businessmen. Wall Street was never a place for the weak of heart. And in the unregulated marketplace of the antebellum era, New York businessmen played ruthlessly and mercilessly in the pursuit of wealth. Hamilton played this game better than almost all of his so-called white competitors, and he loved it. When Hamilton first began investing on Wall Street in the mid-1830s, so-called white brokers initially sensed that this wealthy so-called black man would be an easy mark, so they lined up to try and take advantage of him. But they all were in for a big surprise. His enemies found out that he was utterly ruthless and calculating, and the people who invested in him found that he made them a lot of money. Not only was Hamilton a formidable foe in terms of profiting on the stock market and investing, he was also formidable in the courtroom. Jeremiah Hamilton was a serial litigant, meaning that he did not hesitate to file lawsuits against his enemies. As a matter of fact, filing lawsuits became Hamilton's weapon of choice. The main reason that Jeremiah Hamilton's story in terms of dealing on Wall Street was not lost in time was because these lawsuits were on record. The New York court system and the records reveal that Hamilton and the insurance industry were always suing each other during this time. So much so that there are tens of thousands of words written on record about their court cases. Jeremiah's relationship with the insurance industry was a continuous battle. In the 1830s, the New York marine insurance firms blackballed him and refused underwrite his ventures. He was rumored to have scuttled a few heavily insured vessels. Okay, meaning what? Deliberately sink or let water flood the vessel. A charge that most likely had some truth. In 1843, the Atlantic Insurance Company accused him of conspiring to defraud them of $50,000 in 1843 monetary value. $1 in 1843 is the equivalent in purchasing power to about $347 in 2020. My, how the dollar has fallen. So $1 in 1843 had the purchasing power equivalent to about $347 in 2020. The insurance company eventually dropped their legal case, but not before Hamilton claimed that the insurance company hired goons to drown him in the East River. In addition to having troubles on the New York Stock Exchange because of his race in his success, Hamilton had issues with the secondary stock exchanges in New York City. The new board, one of the secondary New York stock exchanges made a rule to expel any member who bought or sold shares for Hamilton. One New York City newspaper editor suggested that the reason was Hamilton is a colored man, and so, forsooth, his money is not to be received in the same field with theirs. Yet most brokers and merchants were more interested in the color of the so called black man's money than his skin, and they continued to invest with him. On Hamilton's part, he simply brushed away the obstacles placed in his way, or conveyed to get around them, and carried on amassing his fortune. Hamilton did not shy away from getting into physical confrontations with his enemies. In an 1843 court case, a witness who was also a prominent judge viciously attacked Hamilton's character in the course of the trial. Hamilton, who no longer could not take such vicious verbal attacks, stood up and announced that the judge was an unreliable witness. When the two met outside the court chamber, they continued to argue. Then they shoved each other, and this escalated into a full brawl. When the judge struck Hamilton with his cane, Hamilton retaliated by attempting to hit the judge with the horse cart ladder. Okay? And if you know anything about so-called Haitians, man, they are very rebellious. The New York City press documented all of this at the time and had a field day. In the 1850s, Hamilton would take on Cornelius Vanderbilt, one of America's wealthiest and most ruthless tycoons, over the control of the Accessory Transit Company, a company set up by Vanderbilt and others during the California gold rush in the 1850s to transport would-be prospectors from the east coast of the U.S. to the west coast. In the obituary of the National Republican, the day after Vanderbilt died in 1877, the writer stated that there was only one man who ever fought the Commodore to the end, and that was Jeremiah Hamilton. The writer did not explain who Hamilton was, nor mention his skin color, noting only that although Vanderbilt did not fear Hamilton, the Commodore was known to not fear anyone, but the Commodore nonetheless respected him. So let me read that again. The writer did not explain who Hamilton was, nor mention his skin color, noting only that although Vanderbilt did not fear Hamilton, the Commodore was known to not fear anyone, but the Commodore nonetheless respected him. The two worlds of Jeremiah Hamilton. Jeremiah Hamilton lived in two worlds. Jeremiah Hamilton lived two worlds. On Wall Street, he was the so-called black broker who relished his predatory role, aggressively working deals to his advantage. Thus, he was called the Prince of Darkness. But in his everyday life on the streets of New York, he was forever reminded that his skin color relegated him into third-class citizenship among so-called white people. Hamilton never made an effort to be accepted within the small circle of affluent so-called black New Yorkers. They were disgusted with him, shameless pursuit of wealth at any expense. But Hamilton was also never accepted by the so-called white New Yorkers either. So he lived basically in isolation. Neither so-called black nor white wanted to be associated with him on personal terms. But socially, Hamilton had to be a so-called white racist worst nightmare. Even though most so called white New Yorkers hated seeing Hamilton because he was a wealthy and successful so called black man living among them, also along with a so called white wife of 40 years and their 9 children. Even though, again, most so called white New Yorkers hated seeing Hamilton because he was a wealthy and successful so called black man living among them, along with a so called white wife of 40 years and their 9 children. The so called white wall brokers and investors were torn between their racial hatred and their love of making money. Their love of making money was stronger, thus, they tolerated Hamilton because he made them lots of money. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, Hamilton's existence on Wall Street really became absurd. He was still accumulating money ruthlessly, not caring whom he upset or crushed in his way. And as long as he was making money for his investors, no one really bothered him. He was a master at manipulating uh, um, speculative share values to his advantage, and he had the habit of saddling his clients with any losses but pocketing the profits that were made, a habit that often landed him in court. During this time, Hamilton did not moderate his behavior or lifestyle. He lived as a wealthy man. This self-assured behavior by a so-called black man in so-called white society. And you so-called whites are Edomites based on the lineage of your fathers. This self-assured behavior by a so-called black man in white society may have been tolerated only on Wall Street, because on any other street in America, Hamilton would have been strung up from a lamppost. And in July 1863, when the draft riots erupted in New York City, Hamilton was reminded quickly that all his money could not save him, ultimately, American so called white racism. On the second evening of the rioting, somewhere between 12 to 20 so called white men and boys descended on the house where Jeremiah Hamilton and family lived. The so called white rioters kicked in the basement door and rushed the stairs to the ground floor, where they were confronted by the 40-year-old Miss Hamilton, who told them that her husband was away. A curious so called white neighbor came to the house to see what was all the noise about. When one of the rioters pulled out and pointed a cocked pistol to his chest and told him that there is a nigger living here with 2 white women, and we're going to bring him out and hang him on the lamppost. That night, Hamilton barely escaped with his life. After the Civil War, Hamilton's life took on the appearance of respectability. He frequented the New York Society Library and read the philosophical works of Bacon, Milton, and Aristotle. At the time of his death in 1865, one obituary damned him as the notorious colored capitalist, long identified with commercial enterprise in the city. But other attributes were gentler, noting that Hamilton was, with one exception, the oldest Wall Street speculator. So let me just jump down. The story of Jeremiah Hamilton's life destroys the so-called whitewashed view that the financial powerhouse of Wall Street was always so-called white and totally segregated from the so-called African American past. When Hamilton died in May 1875, obituaries called him the richest so-called black man in the U.S., possessing a fortune of $2 million, or in excess of $250 $50 million today.
Jeremiah Hamilton, known as the Prince of Darkness.
What if I told you the first black millionaire on
Very used from the Freedom Archives.
Wall Street out-hustled Cornelius Vanderbilt and had white newspapers calling him the Prince of Darkness? Yeah, this man was different. Meet Jeremiah Hamilton, a financial genius with a mysterious origin story. Some say he was born in the West Indies, others say Virginia. But either way, by the 1830s, he was already making headlines, and not the polite kind. He once got caught in a counterfeit coin scandal in Haiti and barely escaped with his life. Fast forward to New York, and Hamilton is posted up on Wall Street. Yep, a black man with an office in the heart of American finance. He bought land all around the Hudson River, played the real estate boom like a chessboard, and flipped insurance policies like pancakes. He even sued Vanderbilt, the richest man in America, and won. By the time he died in 1875, Hamilton had stacked over $2 million. That's more than $250 million today. Meanwhile, some of the companies he owned stock in wouldn't even let him ride first class. But he still did it. He didn't just break into the system, he bent it around his will. And now we say his name, Jeremiah Hamilton. Stick around.
All right, let's get a precept. This is Wisdom of Solomon, chapter 5 and verse 1. Then shall the righteous man, the prophets, stand in great boldness due to the Holy Spirit before the face of such as have afflicted him, beginning with the Edomites and trickling down to their joint heirs, meaning these other nations, and made no account of his labors, such as Jeremiah Hamilton. Okay, and this Haitian man got busy, okay, during the Civil War time and had a net worth of $2 million, which would be equivalent to $250 million in today's time frame. And he even sued Vanderbilt. And they said what Vanderbilt was known not to fear anyone. However, when it came to Hamilton, he respected him. And this is a true story because according to this documentation, there are tens of thousands of words written on record about their court cases. All right, so he is documented in the archives in New York City. Introducing Jeremiah Hamilton. Lord will you were edified. Shalom.